Four sun-faded backpacks swung from a wind-bent pine rooted in a crack of granite 60 feet down. A sheer wall colors, bleached-to-dust straps braided by years of storms. The tree creaked against the cliff, and the packs turned slowly, like they were listening to the mountain breathe. Let me know where you're listening from, and share this if you believe remembering is the first step toward justice. I measure that year by the sound of the school bell and the smell of pine sap warming on afternoon sidewalks. My days were simple and orderly. I opened the library at 7:30 sharp, turned on the lamps that threw gentle ovals of light across the carpet, and laid out the storytime rug so the first graders could find their spots by the animal stitched in the corner. Estes Park has its own clock coffee at sunrise, the tourist vans idling by 8 elk, bugling from the meadows before dinner. In early fall, the air thins and the mornings bite a little 48 degrees if you're checking the readout in your dashboard, but the sunlight fools you into thinking it's warmer. My sister lived 10 minutes away in a split level with 2 maples that never shed at the same time. If you stood in her driveway and looked west, you could see Long's Peak, a hard blue triangle when the sky was clear. Marcus liked to time his coffee with that view, 1 mug, 1 deep breath, and then the day could begin. Elena swore it made her calmer on night shift weeks. She kept her nurse's shoes in a little tray by the door, a straight line of white against the tile, and God help you if you kicked them crooked. Saturdays, the Brennans and the Caldwells moved like clockwork. The girls played hopscotch, chalked across both sidewalks, a wobbly ladder of squares that ran from one mailbox to the other. David would lean on his fence and toss an orange across to Marcus. I still hear that soft smack of peel into palm. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood where everyone knows your dog's name, you know the rhythm borrowed cups of sugar porch chats about weather that turn into plans for a hike, the easy grace that comes from trust. I'd promised the girls I'd keep Bailey their golden retriever for the weekend while the 2 families camped. Bailey was a sweetheart, 100 pounds of hope with a wet nose and a tail that dusted my floor like a feather duster. He followed me from room to room, resting his chin on my knee any time I sat down. On Friday before they left, Elena swung by with his bag of food, 2 tennis balls, and a note that read like a nurse's checklist. 1 cup in the morning, 1 cup at dinner. No table scraps. He loves the red ball more than the green. They'd been planning that trip since July. Marcus believed lists saved lives, and his lists could have earned rank in the Army. He and David had compared routes with the care some men reserve for stock portfolios. The plan was gentle, family-safe trails around Bear Lake on Saturday, back home by Sunday at 6 hot showers and laundry before school on Monday. I had their itinerary printed and folded in my purse, along with emergency numbers and a rough square marked call if timing changes. We were a family that called. You could set your watch by it. Friday night felt like any other start to a Colorado weekend. I closed the library swung by the King Soopers for milk and a rotisserie chicken and went home to a quiet house broken only by Bailey's thumping tail and the soft chain of his tags. The wind came up after sunset, that dry mountain wind that slips under your sill plates and sighs like an old door. I put a blanket over my legs and pretended to read while I waited for Elena's text telling me they'd made camp. At 8:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. "We're set," she wrote. "Girls roasting marshmallows. See you Sunday." She added a row of little flame emojis, even though she's the one who always teased me about using them. Saturday morning, I ran story time and read Blueberries for Sal in my best librarian voice, the one that makes toddlers lean forward and grandfathers close their eyes for a minute. When it was over, I wiped sticky fingerprints off the back table and checked my phone. At 10:15 a.m., a message arrived: the 4 girls, shoulder-to-shoulder hair, frizzed by altitude and Joy Bear Lake, behind them flat and shining like a mirror, no clouds, no wind, as if the world had asked for a day without trouble. No caption needed, but Elena sent one anyway. Perfect weather. See you tomorrow. That afternoon, I drove out past Lake Estes and parked in the lot by the picnic tables to toss the ball for Bailey. The sun was warm enough for a light sweatshirt, the kind of day that erases arguments and makes chores feel optional. A pair of college kids packed climbing gear into a hatchback. A retired couple walked hand in hand counting steps under their breath as if the number itself were a kind of prayer. The mountains had that baked stone smell they get after a dry week, and when the breeze shifted, I caught a hint of wood smoke from the campground. If I could bottle that, I'd keep it on my desk and open it whenever the world got too loud. By sunset, I'd fallen into my sister's routine without thinking. I rinsed apples and set them in a colander like she did, took a sponge to the counter in slow circles, and checked the front lock twice. Bailey paced from window to window, tail sweeping low as if tracking a feeling he couldn't place. I told him to settle, and he did, flopping down with a groan that sounded like a much older dog. I set my phone on the mantel where I wouldn't miss a buzz. In our family, a good day ended with a quick call, 5 minutes. Not more, just enough to draw a line under whatever had happened. Sunday arrived clear and cool, about 50 degrees at 7 a.m., sun painting the ridgeline gold. I brewed coffee in Elena's favorite pot, the squat blue one with the chipped rim, and left the kitchen window open a crack so I could hear the neighborhood wake up. Lawn mowers coughed once and quieted. Somewhere a garage door rumbled and a car backed into the street. I missed church and felt only a pinch of guilt. I told myself I'd make the evening service if they got home early and wanted to drop by for dinner. The plan was roast chicken with potatoes. The girls ate the potatoes. First always have, always will. At noon, I texted a heart and a thumbs up, not wanting to interrupt whatever trail they were exploring. I imagined the girls counting trout in the cold stream that runs north of the path, scooping water with their hands and yipping when their fingers burned from the cold. Around 2, I took Bailey to my sister's to pick up a forgotten sweatshirt, Zoe's pale yellow, with a soccer patch near the hem. I locked the door behind me and placed the sweatshirt on the bottom stair to take back later, a little ritual of faith that the evening would unfold like it always did. 3 o'clock slid by, then 4. I started the chicken at 4:30 so it would be ready by 6. The house carried the smell of rosemary and garlic, and Bailey parked himself by the oven, though he is a rule-following dog and never begs. I set the table for 6 out of habit. I even pulled the extra 2 chairs from the hall because the Caldwells usually walked over to say hello before heading home. Sarah would offer to wash the dishes in that stubborn way of hers, and David would pour water like it was fine wine, joking that hydration had replaced all other pleasures now that he was pushing 40. At 5:10, I checked the traffic cams between the park entrance and town, tapping through the little highway windows on my phone. The lanes looked light. I told myself the girls had persuaded the grown-ups to stop for ice cream at the parlor near the bridge. The owner keeps the shop too cold, in my opinion, 65 degrees on a summer day with the door propped open, but he scoops generous and his mint chip is green without being electric, which I respect. 6 o'clock came and went. The chicken rested on the stovetop under a foil tent, juices running clear the way the recipe promises. I turned the oven off and on again as if that could hold time in place. I don't panic early. Librarians are trained to wait 5 beats before declaring something lost. At 6:20, I sent a text. "Everything okay? Dinner's ready if you want it." Nothing came back. At 6:45, I called and heard Elena's voice on the greeting, cheerful, as always asking me to leave a message. I didn't. I hung up and breathed, pretending the air was a bridge from their silence to mine. I stirred the pan gravy, added a splash more stock, then poured it down the drain. Too salty, I told myself, though it wasn't. The sky darkened earlier than I expected. September does that, slides the light out from under you without asking. I clicked on the porch light and stood there for a moment, holding the door frame to steady myself, the way you do when a memory sneaks up and you're not sure if it's from the past or the future. On our street, the sound that marks evening is tires whispering against asphalt as folks come home from work or from the park. It's a sound you don't notice until it isn't there. At 7:15, I fed Bailey and set my plate in the dishwasher untouched. The phone lay face up on the counter, black and blank. I wiped it with my sleeve as if the screen were the problem. The neighbor's porch across the street flicked on a cone of amber pooling on their steps. I looked at the 2 extra chairs by my table and felt embarrassed, as if I'd set them out as a joke no one else understood. 7:30 turned the mountains into cutouts, dark shapes against a navy sky. A little wind picked up rattling the maple leaves in my sister's yard, the way they rattle when a storm is still a county away. I checked my purse to make sure the itinerary was where I'd left it. The paper was warm from being carried too long. I refolded it more carefully than it needed, lining the creases with my thumbnail so everything sat straight. By 8, the house had the quiet of a church after the last hymn. I set Elena's nurse shoes upright in their tray again, though no one had touched them. I switched the porch light off, then on, then off, then back on, as if there were a code I couldn't remember. In the window, the reflection of my living room floated over the yard lamps, steady chairs waiting a sweatshirt on the stairs exactly where I'd left it. I stood there listening to nothing, my hand on the switch, and told myself they'd be pulling into the driveway any minute, headlights climbing the far bend, engine settling into a friendly idle, before the doors opened and the girls burst in shouting, "First dibs on the bathroom." The road stayed dark. The porch light burned, making a small island in the night, and I left it that way. By 8:30 that night, the street outside my house was still quiet, no headlights sweeping the wall, no laughter carried on the air. I tried calling Elena again, straight to voicemail, then Marcus. Nothing. The stillness began to hum in my ears. I told myself their phones were dead, or maybe the girls had begged for one last marshmallow roast before leaving the park. But as 9 o'clock came and went, that calm logic started to sound thin. Bailey pressed his nose to the door and gave a single uneasy whine. I remember whispering, "It's all right," even though I was saying it to myself. By 9:30 I called the ranger station. The dispatcher's voice was professional steady. She took my details, 8 missing 2 families, last contact Saturday morning. When I hung up, the house felt larger than it had any right to be. The porch light still burned a circle of yellow in the dark, and I sat beside the phone waiting for it to ring. Around 10, a Park Service vehicle rolled into the Brennan's drive. I could see the flash of headlights through the trees. 2 rangers stepped out their radios, murmuring. One of them, a woman in her 40s with her hair pulled tight, introduced herself as Chief Ranger Patricia Vance. "We're heading straight up to Moraine Park," she said. "We'll call you as soon as we've located the vehicles." The minutes after they left stretched thin and brittle. I watched the clock crawl past midnight, thinking about where the families might have turned off, which trail they'd likely have chosen. Bear Lake was a safe route, popular even at dusk. Marcus never strayed from marked paths. Around 2 a.m. my phone rang. It was Vance. "We found both SUVs," she said. "Everything's in order. Tents, food, coolers. No one here." Her voice softened on that last sentence, as if she knew how it would land. Morning came pale and cold. I drove to the ranger post with Bailey riding silent in the passenger seat. The campground sat empty except for a few vehicles belonging to the search crew. The Brennan's tent was still standing zipper halfway open. Inside were neatly folded clothes, 2 sleeping bags rolled tight, and a box of graham crackers sealed in a plastic bin. Across the way, the Caldwell's camp looked just as deliberate chairs stacked lantern-hung, nothing scattered or broken. It didn't feel like a crime scene or an accident. It felt paused, like everyone had stepped away for a moment and simply hadn't come back. Chief Vance led me a few yards down to the picnic table where they'd laid out the family's belongings. "No sign of a struggle," she said. "Everything points to an organized departure sometime Saturday." I stared at Elena's stainless steel thermos, the one I'd given her for Christmas. It was dented at the base from where she'd dropped it on a trail last year. Seeing it there felt like being split in two, half of me rooted in disbelief, the other already grieving something I couldn't name. By sunrise Monday, the search had widened to the Bear Lake Trail Network. From the air helicopters combed the ridges, their blades chopping the morning quiet into restless pieces. Ground teams moved in grid lines, voices echoing through the trees. Marcus Elena dogs padded along on leashes, noses, low tails, stiff with concentration. I followed one team for a mile before a ranger kindly asked me to return to the command post. He wasn't wrong. I was slowing them down. Back at the post, they'd set up a whiteboard covered in names, times, and drawn lines tracing the trails like veins on a hand. Every hour those lines stretched farther. News of the disappearance traveled fast. By Tuesday evening, reporters began arriving, their vans lining the narrow road to the campground. I gave a short statement through tears asking hikers to check side trails or note anything unusual. The Park Service kept the tone careful, missing persons not tragedy. Vance told me they'd located the last confirmed photo Saturday morning, the families at Bear Lake, all smiles. She didn't have to describe it. I knew the one. The first few days were a blur of noise. Helicopters, radios, the constant rustle of maps being unfolded and folded again. Volunteers came from as far as Denver, skilled mountaineers with ropes coiled across their shoulders. They searched ravines and scree fields, calling until their voices cracked. Every evening they returned hollow-eyed, shaking their heads. When the sun dropped behind the ridge, the temperature plummeted. You could feel winter testing its edge. By the end of the first week, I'd learned to recognize hope by its sound the moment before a ranger spoke, when the silence held just long enough to mean maybe. Each time that pause ended the same way, nothing found. We gathered at a folding table under a canvas tent for briefings. The park medic handed out cups of instant coffee so strong it made my hands shake. They were experienced, one volunteer murmured beside me. Families like that don't just walk off. I wanted to agree, but experience was exactly what made it so impossible. Marcus planned for everything. When you wait like that, time starts to bend. Mornings feel too bright, nights too short. By the second week, I was sleeping in my car at the trailhead, Bailey curled at my feet. The rangers didn't stop me. They knew better than to argue. Each day I helped catalog gear brought in from search zones, lost hats, empty water bottles, scraps of fabric that looked promising until they weren't. I kept telling myself that 8 people couldn't vanish. There had to be footprints somewhere, a sign of a fall, a piece of equipment left behind. But the wilderness gave nothing back. By late September, the first snow flurries brushed the higher peaks. Search teams switched to cold weather gear, trudging through drifts that swallowed the old tracks. I remember Vance standing at the map, tracing a gloved finger along a new grid. "We've covered nearly 30 miles in every direction," she said quietly. "If they're still out there, they're beyond our reach for now." She didn't say the word dead, but it was there, unspoken and heavy. The following weeks became a routine of updates and silences. Some hikers claimed to have seen a flash of bright color in a distant gully. Others reported distant voices. Each lead pulled the crews deeper into the park, only to end in another dead clearing. I gave interviews I barely remember, giving faces of cameras blurred by cold air and grief. My parents flew in from New Mexico, and we sat together at the kitchen table where Elena once braided the girls' hair before school. Every chair carried a ghost of sound, Zoe humming Iris, giggling Marcus clinking his coffee spoon against the mug. I couldn't make myself clear the table. October brought heavier snow, and with it the official decision to suspend the search. I was there when Vance made the announcement. Her voice wavered once before she steadied it. "We will continue limited monitoring through the winter." I knew what that meant. I stood in the back, hands in my coat pockets, eyes on the floor. Reporters scribbled. Someone asked about foul play, another about animal attacks. Vance only shook her head. "No evidence either way," she said. "We simply don't know." That night I drove home behind a convoy of ranger trucks, headlights fading into the mist. Bailey lay on the seat beside me, breathing slow. At every bend in the road, I caught myself glancing at the turnoff to Bear Lake, half expecting to see the 2 SUVs parked there again, waiting for their owners. I don't remember pulling into my driveway, only standing inside my front door with the light still on, realizing the house was exactly as I'd left it. The chicken pan was still in the sink. The sweatshirt still sat on the stairs. I went upstairs and lay awake, listening to the wind moving through the eaves. In the months that followed, I tried to return to routine. The library reopened for winter term, and I learned how to move through the day without drawing attention. Children laughed, pages turned, the bell chimed at closing. But underneath the question never left: how can 8 people disappear without a trace? I started keeping a notebook, writing down every detail I remembered: the time, stamps, the weather, even the brand of the girls' hiking boots. It wasn't obsession so much as preservation. I didn't want their lives to shrink to a headline. Spring came early the next year, melting the snow before the calendar said it should. I went back up to the park alone, walking the trail to Bear Lake with Bailey trotting ahead. The water was still frozen around the edges, pale sunlight flashing on the surface. I stood where the photo had been taken, looking out at the same curve of shoreline. It felt impossible that somewhere beyond that ridge, my sister and her family could be lying unseen. I spoke their names out loud, not expecting an answer, just needing the air to hold them for a moment. Over the next few years, the case settled into that uneasy place between memory and legend. Every spring, volunteers returned for a week-long search, combing new ground where snowmelt had exposed debris. Each time they came back empty-handed. Occasionally, someone would report finding a scrap of fabric or a child's mitten, and hope would surge for a day before the lab results ruled it out. The Park Service kept the case open on paper, but everyone knew it had drifted into the category of things the mountains keep. 6 years is a long time to wait for an echo. When the call came that October morning in 2016, I was shelving returns at the library. The ranger on the line asked if I could come up to headquarters right away. There'd been a discovery on Long's Peak. I didn't ask what kind. I already knew it was about them. On the drive up, the aspen leaves spun through the air like coins, bright and careless. At the base of the trail, I saw the park vehicles, gathered lights flashing against the rock face. Vance was there, older, grayer, her expression unreadable. She motioned me aside and said quietly, "We've found something you should see." Even before she told me what it was, I felt it, the strange calm that comes when hope and dread occupy the same space. I followed her toward the overlook where climbers stood, roped in their helmets, catching the sun. Far below, on a narrow shelf of granite, hung the outline of something familiar, colors dulled by time but still recognizable. A red strap, a patch of blue. The wind shifted, and they swayed gently like they were greeting us. That's where this part of the story ends, with 4 weather-worn backpacks turning slowly in the mountain windproof that silence doesn't last forever, only until the earth decides to speak. The sound that reached me first was the wind against the rock face, low, constant, like the mountain was exhaling after holding its breath for too many years. I stood behind the ranger tape, looking at those 4 backpacks laid out on a tarp, their colors faded into soft browns and grays. It was October sunlight, thin and unforgiving, and every piece of fabric looked like it had absorbed a lifetime of weather. Chief Vance knelt beside the evidence technician, both of them in silence. You didn't need words for what that kind of discovery meant. I remember asking if they were sure. She nodded once, her mouth pressed tight. "We found IDs inside one," she said quietly. "Marcus's name." That single sentence dropped through me like a stone. They carried the packs down by helicopter that evening. I followed the convoy to a secured building in Estes Park, where the forensic team had set up. Dr. Rebecca Chen had come up from Denver, an expert in recovering evidence from long-exposed materials. She treated the items like artifacts from another time, laying them on clean paper, taking photographs before touching anything. I stood in the corner trying to make sense of how ordinary it all looked. First aid kits, trail mix, notebooks, objects that belonged to a weekend, not a mystery. It was a strange kind of heartbreak, seeing proof they had been there all along, just beyond reach. When Dr. Chen lifted the first notebook, its pages warped, but still holding together, she paused to read a few lines. I could see the handwriting even from where I stood, Marcus's neat block letters. She turned toward me and said softly, "You might want to sit down." She read the last entry aloud, each word clear and deliberate. "Girls saw something shiny up the cliff near Chasm Lake. David thinks it might be a plane. We're going to check it out." That one line cracked open every certainty I'd clung to. They hadn't vanished by accident. They'd changed their plan. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread relief that there was finally a reason dread, because I knew Chasm Lake. It wasn't a family trail. It was steep, unpredictable, the kind of route climbers prepared for not kids with snack bags and cameras. The next item to be opened was Elena's backpack. Inside was her digital camera, the same one I'd helped her buy after Christmas in 2008. The casing was scratched but intact. The technician slid out the memory card and passed it to a laptop. When the first image appeared, no one spoke. It was the same morning shot I already knew, the girls smiling at Bear Lake, but as the tech clicked forward, the pictures shifted. The light grew harsher, shadows sharper. They were climbing higher than planned. The final photo stopped us cold. The girls were pointing upward toward a sliver of metal, catching the sun on a sheer wall. From the angle, it looked impossibly high. Dr. Chen leaned closer, whispering, "That's the diamond." It took hours for this team to catalog everything, but the story was already beginning to form. The Caldwell's packs revealed more climbing gear than I expected: rope, carabiners, gloves. David had once done light climbing in college, but it wasn't something they ever brought up again. I kept hearing his laugh in my head, the way he used to say, "The ground's the safest view." Now it seemed he'd changed his mind. Sarah's pack held her journal. The final entry was shaky, written in pencil pressed too hard. "If it's really a plane, we'll be the ones to find it. The girls are so excited." I had to step outside for air after that. The evening smelled like snow, coming clean and sharp. The next morning I drove up to the park office where Vance was coordinating the follow-up. Her desk was buried under maps. She pointed to a section near the base of the diamond wall. The GPS from one of the kids' packs still worked enough for us to recover the route data, she said. They went off-trail around noon that Saturday, followed the chasm path, and stopped here. Her finger tapped a set of coordinates that sat in blank space. No trail, no reason to be there. "We're assembling a technical climbing team," she added. "That area's practically vertical." I wanted to ask if she thought they'd fallen, but the question felt cruel. Instead, I asked if she'd seen the metallic reflection herself. She nodded. "Old mining equipment, most likely. There were a few prospecting attempts in that region 100 years ago. I remember feeling the ground tilt under me. All that excitement, that impulse to explore it, had led them toward a ghost of history, not discovery. Over the next few days, the weather held steady cold, but clear enough for a recovery team to climb. I stayed at the ranger post, unable to go home, listening to the steady hum of radio updates. Each transmission came through with wind interference, words clipped by static. By the third day, one climber's voice broke through clearly. "Found something. Narrow ledge, about 400 feet up. Human artifacts present." Vance caught my eye across the room, and I could see in her face that this was it. They worked until dusk to reach the ledge. When the first bag came down, wrapped carefully in orange nylon, the ranger who carried it removed his helmet and set it gently at my feet. "They made shelter up there," he said softly, "used what they had." I asked how he knew. He described a small alcove formed by the rock lined with branches and fabric scraps. There were empty water bottles, bits of foil that might have been used to signal. No bodies yet, but signs of long habitation days, maybe a week. That word habitation caught in my throat. They'd been alive for a while. The following day brought confirmation. Human remains, multiple, clustered near the ledge. Vance and her team handled the communication with families officially, but she called me personally before the press release. Her voice was quiet, respectful. "They didn't fall," she said. "They got trapped. They ran out of supplies. I remember gripping the edge of the table, staring at the grain of the wood until it blurred. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing them on that narrow strip of stone, the parents trying to stay calm. The girls huddled under makeshift blankets, their voices echoing against the mountain, while search helicopters passed overhead. The thought that they had been alive while we were still searching below will never stop hurting. They must have seen the aircraft, heard the noise, and waved, not knowing how invisible they were from that angle. The mountain had hidden them in plain sight. When the recovery was complete, Dr. Chen invited me to see what they'd gathered. Among the items were torn sections of tarp, a melted flashlight, and a small mirror still speckled with fingerprints. She said it was likely used to flash sunlight toward the valley. I asked how long they might have survived. 4 to 6 days, give or take, she said. Dehydration would have set in fast at that elevation. I thanked her, though it felt inadequate. Gratitude is a strange thing. When it's built on tragedy, it has nowhere to land. The story hit the national news that week. Photos of the families appeared on every channel: 2 smiling couples, 4 bright-eyed girls in matching fleece jackets. Commentators spoke about the dangers of curiosity in the wild, about respecting boundaries. I watched in silence, wondering what Marcus or Elena would have thought of that. They weren't reckless people. They were parents who loved showing their kids the world's beauty. They just didn't know that one wrong turn could erase them for 6 years. After the broadcasts faded, I found myself driving up to the park again, drawn by habit or grief, I couldn't tell which. The snow line had crept down, covering the lower trails. I walked as far as the rangers would let me, stopping near the base of the climb. The wind came off the peaks, carrying the faint smell of pine and cold rock. Somewhere above that ledge held the last traces of their life, the shelter, the empty bottles, the mirror. It felt wrong to leave them there, even though they were finally at rest. In the months that followed, the Park Service held safety meetings and training updates. Vance told me they were rewriting their search protocols, expanding grids, accounting for unconventional routes. "If anything good can come from this," she said, "it's that we'll look higher next time." I nodded, though I couldn't decide if that counted as good. Spring brought the memorial service. Families, rangers, and townspeople filled the small chapel off Main Street. I spoke briefly, my voice steady until I reached the part about the girls' laughter echoing between houses. Outside afterward, the mountains looked almost gentle snow melting in veins down the slopes. I thought of the miners a century earlier, leaving behind their tools and rusted dreams, never knowing they'd lure 8 souls decades later. The irony was cruel enough to feel intentional, though I knew it wasn't. Nature isn't cruel, just indifferent. Before I left, I stopped by the new plaque near Bear Lake. Their names were etched cleanly into the bronze, the metal warm under my hand from the afternoon sun. Someone had placed wildflowers along the base, blue columbines, and a few sprigs of pine. I didn't cry then. Grief, when it's lived this long, becomes quieter, like water settling in rock. On my drive home, the sky turned the color of old photographs, soft gold fading into gray. For the first time in years, I rolled the window down and let the cold air fill the car. Somewhere in that wind, I thought I heard the faintest echo of children laughing carried down from the high country. I told myself it was memory playing tricks. But as the last light hit the ridge, something silver glinted far above, catching the sun for just a moment before disappearing. I watched it fade and whispered, "I see you." Then I drove on, ready to learn what the final reports would reveal when the investigation closed, but not yet ready for what they might mean. The light that morning came thin through the lodge windows, dust swirling in it like old snow. I sat alone with a cup of coffee gone cold, waiting for the call that would confirm what we already knew. It came just after 9. Chief Vance's voice was quiet, careful. "We've begun bringing them down," she said. "You don't need to be here for this part, but I did." I told her I was already on my way. Driving up toward Long's Peak felt like moving through someone else's dream-familiar roads, made foreign by what they now held. The mountains rose sharper that day, not majestic but watchful. When I reached the base of the operation, the air carried that sterile mix of diesel rope fiber and pine. The rescue truck sat lined like Sentinel's engines idling low. No reporters yet, thank God. Just the quiet machinery of people who'd done this too many times before. They'd roped off the lower trail to keep it clear for recovery teams. A ranger I didn't know handed me a reflective vest and said softly, "You can stand near the overlook if you want, ma'am, but please stay back when they come through." I thanked him, though my voice barely worked. The wind whipped across the granite ledge, stinging my eyes. Down the slope, the climbers were little bright dots against the gray. I tried to picture Marcus and Elena up there 6 years earlier, steadying the girls' small hands, promising it was safe. The thought broke something open inside me. When the first stretcher came into view, silence fell across the crew. The motion slowed the deliberate care of people who understand gravity both kinds. Each shape was wrapped in weatherproof material, anonymous and sacred. I didn't need to see faces to know which bundle was which. There was a way Marcus's frame curved even in stillness, the line of his shoulders protective final. Vance approached helmet tucked under one arm. She looked older, deep lines around her eyes, streaks of silver in her braid. "They were together," she said quietly. 2 adults close, the others nearby. I nodded, unable to speak. It was what I'd hoped for in the cruelest sense that they hadn't died alone. They took the remains down in intervals, the ropes moving in slow, careful rhythm. I watched until the last orange bundle disappeared into the trees and only the wind was left. There's a kind of quiet that follows truth, the kind that feels heavier than the waiting ever did. Later that afternoon, Dr. Chen met me at the ranger station. She was gentle but factual, the way doctors are when Mercy has to share space with science. She explained what they'd found on that ledge: a small tarp shelter, some torn clothing, a flashlight melted from long exposure food wrappers folded with precision. They'd survived for days, she said, 4, maybe 6, long enough to try signaling for help with mirrors and scraps of fabric. They likely succumbed to exposure and dehydration, she told me. Her tone carried respect, not pity. I thanked her for that. It took weeks before the coroner's reports came back, though the cause of death wasn't in question. What mattered were the details, their final hours, the sequence of events. The evidence showed they'd reached the ledge by climbing part way, then slipping onto that narrow shelf when they couldn't go higher. The worn grooves on the rock suggested multiple attempts to ascend again, maybe to scout for rescue, maybe to keep the girls distracted. One of the ropes was still anchored above frayed where the tension had given out. What struck me most were the notes. They'd written them on the backs of trail maps and grocery receipts, little messages tucked under stones. Love you, stay brave. Tell them we tried. None of those were meant for me, but I read them as if they were. In time, the investigation narrowed to a single narrative the families had followed. The glint of what they thought was an aircraft wreck, a fragment of metal wedged in the cliff face. In truth, it was a rusted piece of mining equipment left behind by prospectors sometime around 1910. I went to see it myself months later. A small winch wheel, nothing more than a ring of corroded iron sun flashing off its edge just so. That reflection had drawn them upward. They must have believed they were chasing history. It was only debris. After the recovery, the Park Service invited me to a closed meeting to review the operation. They wanted to learn from it how 8 people could disappear in a monitored national park. I sat in the back as the rangers discussed satellite imaging drone mapping communication gaps. I listened to words like search radius and signal loss spoken with clinical calm, and I realized the mountains didn't care about our systems. They'd kept their secret until they were ready to give it back. Winter came early that year. Snow erased the ledge by December, sealing it again in white silence. The official report was released in January, and the media descended for one last wave of coverage. I declined interviews, though a few persistent voices called the library asking for quotes. What could I possibly add? The truth was already simple enough. 2 families followed curiosity into danger, and the wilderness did what wilderness always does. It kept what it could. In the months that followed, I found a kind of numb rhythm to my days. I still fed Bailey at 6 sharp, though he was gray around the muzzle now. I still drove to the lake sometimes, parking at the same overlook where we used to picnic. The water froze and thawed, the seasons turned, and the plaque went up near Bear Lake, a bronze tablet set into stone with their names etched cleanly: Marcus and Elena, Brennan, David, and Sarah Caldwell, Zoe, Iris Maya, and Chloe. I ran my fingers over each name, the metal warm under sunlight, and whispered them aloud one at a time. At the dedication, Chief Vance gave a brief speech. She spoke not about danger, but about humility, the way even experience can't outwit the elements. "The mountain reminds us we're guests here," she said. I watched her eyes shine as she read the final line from Elena's notebook: "The girls are having the time of their lives." That was the last known sentence my sister ever wrote. It deserved to be read under open sky. When the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind. The ranger staff was packing up chairs, their laughter soft and tired. A breeze stirred the lake, breaking its reflection into silver ripples. For a moment I thought I saw motion high on the ridge, just sunlight shifting maybe, but I let myself believe it was something else. Sometimes faith doesn't ask for reason. The months turned into a year, and the story found its place among other tragedies talked about less than not at all. But for me, silence was never the same. I'd hear it in small things: the pause between wind gusts, the still air before the library opened the empty beat after a phone stopped ringing. Silence had weight now. It's strange how tragedy changes your understanding of distance. I used to measure miles by road signs and trail markers. Now I measure by absence how far a voice carries before it's swallowed, how deep a canyon must be before sound doesn't come back. The families had been less than half a mile from the main route when they died. Half a mile from rescue, half a mile from home. I sometimes walk that distance behind my house counting steps until the ground feels like it's falling away. Around the 5-minute mark, the quiet settles the same way it must have for them, too vast, too clean. I stop, then close my eyes and listen. It's not for ghosts, it's for understanding. The Park Service has since changed its protocol. Every search now extends beyond expected trails, and drones map blind cliffs that were once considered unreachable. They say it's to prevent another tragedy like ours. I suppose that's the closest thing to meaning we can draw from loss lessons written in hindsight. Still, when I close the library at night and turn off the last lamp, I sometimes see the faint shimmer of that cliff in my mind. It catches the light like a secret trying to be heard. I know better than to look away. The mountain doesn't erase it, remembers in its own language. That's how I hold them now, in that thin place between memory and echo. Marcus's calm voice reading trail maps, Elena's laugh, the girls running through the yard barefoot, the Caldwells waving from across the fence. All of it caught in the long breath of the Rockies. And every year when October rolls around, I drive up to Bear Lake with a thermos of coffee and a small mirror in my coat pocket. I sit by the plaque, wait for the afternoon sun to angle just right, and lift the mirror toward the ridge. A tiny flash of light cuts across the air, brief, bright, almost invisible. Maybe it's foolish, but I like to think they see it. The last time I went, the sky was clear enough to see the diamond in full. The ledge was hidden, as it always is, but I knew exactly where it was. The air was so still I could hear my own heartbeat. I stayed until the light softened to gold, then whispered a promise I keep every year, that their story won't fade into folklore or warning signs, that someone who loved them will always return. When I started the car, the radio came alive with static, then music and old folk song about travelers who never came back. I let it play as the road curved downward, the mountain slowly folding behind me. The sun dipped low, and for a split second a flash of silver winked from the ridge. I don't know if it was reflection or memory, but I nodded toward it as if acknowledging an old friend, and kept driving, ready to face the long, quiet road toward home. The next spring came quiet. Snowmelt trickled down the hillsides, turning the streams clear again, and the park slowly reopened as if nothing had ever been lost there. But for those of us who knew what the mountain had taken, that silence wasn't peaceful, it was sacred. I went back often, sometimes with the rangers, sometimes alone, walking the same roads Marcus and Elena once drove, feeling the thin air that used to make the girls laugh. The air still smelled of pine and cold rock, and for a few seconds each visit I could almost believe nothing had changed. But of course everything had. The investigation closed officially that summer. The final report landed on my kitchen table in a manila envelope, edges already soft from the ranger's hands. 8 deaths manner accidental. Contributing factors: misjudgment of terrain exposure, dehydration. There was no villain, no crime to name. Just choices small and human that stacked together until they became something irreversible. Chief Vance stopped by that evening off duty, but still in her field jacket. She didn't talk like a law officer then, just as someone who had seen too many families carry the same kind of loss. We sat on the back porch, the evening wind shaking the trees, and she said, "We'll never stop trying to learn from this." I told her I believed her, and I did. The changes came slowly but surely. New search patterns expanded aerial grids, better training for high-altitude recovery. Their tragedy had become a blueprint for saving lives. I wish they could have seen that. By fall, the media had moved on, as they always do. The coverage faded from national headlines to local sidebars, then to nothing. The plaque by Bear Lake became the real memorial. People still leave small things there: stones, flowers, even folded notes pressed beneath the edge. I read one once that said, "For Zoe and Maya, who remind us to be careful where wonder leads." I never learned who wrote it. Maybe a teacher or a parent who knew what it meant to look away for 1 second too long. Sometimes hikers stop me when they recognize the name Brennan from the bronze, asking if I knew them. I always answer, they were my family. And then quietly, they were good people. That's all anyone really needs to know. Life didn't pause for the rest of us, though it often felt like it should have. I went back to the library full-time. The children who'd once sat cross-legged for story hour were taller now, their voices deeper. On slow days, I'd catch myself shelving books in alphabetical order by muscle memory, while my thoughts drifted back to the mountains. I found comfort in small routines, quiet proof that time still moved forward, even when I couldn't feel it. Bailey passed away 2 winters after the recovery. I buried him beneath the maple tree in Elena's yard, the same one that used to drop leaves onto the girls' chalk drawings. He'd been waiting for them longer than any of us. Chief Vance retired the following year. Before she left, she invited me to speak at a ranger training seminar about the importance of persistence, how families hold on long after the headlines fade. I told the new recruits that sometimes the search isn't just for bodies, it's for truth, for the thing that lets the living finally sleep again. I saw a few of them wipe their eyes, and I realized that's what legacy really is, not a lesson, but a heartbeat that carries forward. In the years since I've learned that closure isn't a door that shuts, it's a window that stays cracked open, letting memory move through. I still hear the girls' laughter when I walk by a playground. I still picture Marcus checking the compass on his wrist, patient and precise. And Elena. God, I still hear her voice whenever I close a book too hard, her scolding me for abusing the bindings. Grief doesn't disappear. It just softens until it fits in your pocket, small enough to carry. A few months ago, I was invited to attend the unveiling of a new safety exhibit at the park's visitor center. It was called Echoes of the Wild, and one corner featured the Brennan Caldwell case. They'd framed one of Marcus's maps under glass, the ink lines still faint but visible. There was a quote etched beneath it. "Sometimes curiosity leads us home, and sometimes it doesn't." I stood there a long while listening to strangers read the story aloud to their children. One woman whispered, "That's so sad," and her little boy asked why the families didn't just turn back. She said, "Because they thought they were safe." That answer stayed with me. So much of life is just that, believing you're safe until you're not. Afterward, I walked down to Bear Lake one last time before heading home. The afternoon light was that same soft gold I remembered from the photo, the one they took just before everything changed. The lake was calm, mirror-smooth, reflecting the ridges in perfect symmetry. A few hikers stood near the water's edge talking quietly, their voices gentle out of respect for the place. I crouched by the plaque and brushed off a thin layer of pine needles. Someone had left a child's hair ribbon tied in a bow on the corner. It fluttered slightly in the breeze, pink against the bronze. I smiled, then cried, then smiled again. It felt like the mountains themselves were exhaling, finally at peace. Driving back down through Estes Park, the radio caught a local news segment about new wilderness safety measures being rolled out nationwide. They credited early cases, including the Brennan Caldwell tragedy, for prompting reforms. The announcer mentioned expanded drone mapping and family-focused trail education, but I barely heard the words. What mattered was knowing that their story, my sister's story, had changed something beyond our small circle of grief. Their loss became a warning that might save someone else's life. It wasn't justice in the traditional sense, but it was something close to grace. Even now, when I stand at the edge of the forest at dusk, I still feel them there. The air grows still, the pine needles shiver, and for a heartbeat the world feels balanced between what was and what remains. I don't see ghosts. I see continuity, the way love and pain both leave fingerprints on the land. And I've come to understand that remembrance isn't about keeping sorrow alive. It's about refusing to let their voices fade. So every October I return with a mirror in my pocket just like before. I sit by the water until the sun angles low, then tilt the glass toward the ridge. A single flash of light arcs across the valley, quick, bright, barely visible. I never know if anyone else notices, but it's not for them. It's my way of saying, we still see you. You're still here in the wind and the water and the quiet that follows. When I drive home afterward, I don't play the radio. I let the hum of the tires fill the silence. Sometimes if the road is empty and the stars are out, I'll roll down the window and listen for the faint echo of laughter that used to spill from the back seat of their car. It's only the wind, of course, but I let it be them anyway. Because love once spoken doesn't die. It lingers reshaped by distance, softened by time, but never gone. That's what I carry now. Not the image of loss, but the sound of them living, the steady rhythm of footsteps on a trail, the whisper of leaves in the trees, the flash of something bright just beyond reach. Every bit of it a reminder that wonder can be both gift and warning, that beauty can ask more of us than we're prepared to give. So if you ever find yourself standing in a quiet place somewhere, the world feels too big and too still, pause for a moment. Listen. The silence might be holding a story, and if this one stayed with you, share it. Not for views, not for fame, but so no one's name gets lost to the dark. Because the mountains remember, and we should too.